I pressed the button before the host even finished the toast. He was still smiling into the microphone, glass raised, talking about loyalty and partnership like he believed every word of it. The room had that soft golden light people pay too much money for at private events. Crystal glasses, polished silver, low music drifting through the speakers. 100 small signs of success arranged neatly enough to make everyone feel important. I didn't look at the screen when it came alive. I looked at Laura. That was the only thing that mattered. The music cut off in the middle of a note, sharp enough to turn every head in the room. A few people laughed at first, thinking it was some glitch, some mistake by the venue staff. Then the first frame appeared, pale and steady against the wall behind the stage. Laura's smile vanished before the image fully settled. That was how I knew. Not because of the video itself. Not because of the silence spreading across the room. Not because her boss, Daniel Mercer, suddenly looked like a man trying to remember how to breathe. I knew because she didn't look confused. She looked caught. Her eyes found mine from across the room. And in that 1 second I saw everything she'd been hiding behind late nights, clipped answers, and that polished, tired little smile she wore whenever I asked how work was going. There was no outrage in her face. No disbelief. No anger that I would embarrass her in public. Just recognition. Like she had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. Around us, chairs shifted. Someone near the bar muttered, "Jesus." The host stepped back from the microphone. Glass touched glass somewhere in the silence, a tiny accidental sound that seemed louder than anything else. But I stayed where I was, one hand still resting on the remote, calm enough to surprise myself. Laura didn't move. Neither did I. And standing there in that expensive room, with half the city's professional class staring at a screen neither of us could explain away, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost clean. There was no fixing this. No version of the night where we went home and talked it through. No apology waiting on the other side of exposure. Whatever we had been pretending to save had ended long before I pressed that button. That was just the moment everybody else found out. Before that night, everything could still be explained if I wanted it to be. We lived in a suburb outside Seattle, in a neighborhood full of careful landscaping, identical mailboxes, and quiet assumptions. The kind of place where people waved from driveways, compared contractors, and acted like stable routines meant stable lives. Our house sat on a corner lot with dark siding, white trim, and a front porch Laura said made it feel older than it was. I had spent 3 summers rebuilding pieces of that place with my own hands. New steps, better drainage, cedar fencing along the back. Small things that made me feel like I was building something solid. At the time, I still believed I was. I was trying to grow my business, which meant my weeks started early and usually ended with invoices, supplier calls, and numbers spread across the kitchen table. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine. Small commercial remodels, tenant improvements, light construction management when I could get it. I knew how to keep a schedule moving and how to fix a problem without making noise about it. Most days, that was enough. Laura worked at a law firm downtown. Mid-level, corporate side, long hours and polished language. At the beginning, she used to come home and tell me about the people more than the cases. Which partner was impossible, which associate was burning out, who wore ambition like a second suit. Over time that changed. The stories got shorter. Then they stopped. Work became complicated. Work became sensitive. Work became the reason she was late, distracted, unreachable, or too tired to talk. I noticed the shift in pieces. New dresses that weren't really her style. A better phone case, then a different password. Dinners moved later. Weekend errands took longer. She started answering simple questions with professional-sounding patience, like I was a client who needed managing. If I asked how her day went, she'd say, "Long." If I asked whether she'd be home for dinner, she'd say, "Don't wait up." None of it was dramatic on its own. That was the trick of it. Nothing arrived all at once. A lot of nights, I told myself I was being unfair. People change under pressure. Careers stretch them thin. Marriage has seasons. I repeated those things because they were easier than asking the real question. Easier than admitting that the distance in our house no longer felt temporary. I would hear her come in after 10, heels in one hand, phone in the other, moving quietly through the dark like she belonged to another version of the night. Then I'd lie there and pretend sleep had taken me, because pretending was still simpler than knowing. From the outside, we looked almost normal. We still attended dinners, still sent holiday cards, still stood beside each other in photographs with the right posture and the right expressions. If someone had asked me then whether something was wrong, I probably would have smiled and said we were both just busy. And maybe part of me even believed it. That was the last comfortable lie I had. It didn't really change the night I exposed her. By the time I stood in that room with the remote in my hand, most of the work had already been done. Not out loud. Not in any way anyone else could see. The shift happened earlier, in a place that didn't belong to either of us. It happened 3 weeks before that dinner. I was sitting alone at the back of a quiet bar near the edge of downtown. Not the kind of place people dressed up for. No polished wood, no curated lighting. Just worn stools, low conversation, and a bartender who didn't ask questions as long as you paid and kept to yourself. I had finished a site visit late and didn't feel like going home yet. That had been happening more often, though I didn't say it out loud. That's where she found me. Claire didn't introduce herself right away. She just took the seat beside me like it was already hers and set a small black remote on the counter between us. Not a phone, not a business card. Just that. Simple. Intentional. I remember looking at it first, then at her. She wasn't nervous. That was the first thing I noticed. People who are about to say something complicated usually show it in small ways. Hands, posture, the way they choose their words. She didn't have any of that. She looked like someone who had already decided her part was done. "You're going to want this," she said. No explanation. No build-up. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I didn't touch it. Why? I asked. She gave a small shrug, like the question didn't really matter. Because you're the only one who hasn't seen it yet. That was enough to get my attention. There are moments when something shifts before you fully understand why. The tone, the timing, the way a sentence lands just slightly off from normal conversation. I felt that shift then. Not panic, not anger. Just a quiet awareness that whatever came next wasn't going to fit inside the version of things I'd been maintaining. "What is it?" I asked. Claire finally looked at me directly. Clarity. She slid the remote an inch closer. Then she stood up. No dramatic pause. No warning about what I was about to see. Just a simple, "Wait until you're ready." And she walked out of the bar like she had somewhere else to be. I sat there for a long time without moving. The bartender wiped down the counter. 2 guys argued quietly about a game in the corner. A couple near the door laughed at something that didn't reach me. Everything around me stayed ordinary, which made the object in front of me feel even more out of place. I didn't press anything that night. I took it home instead, left it on the kitchen counter, walked past it more than once like it might explain itself if I gave it enough time. Laura came in late, same as usual, barely noticing me, barely noticing anything that wasn't already part of her routine. That was when the change actually started. Not with confrontation, with observation. For the first time, I stopped explaining things away. I stopped filling in the gaps with better versions of reality. The late nights stayed late. The distance stayed distance. The small inconsistencies stopped being temporary and started forming a pattern. I didn't need answers yet. I just needed to see clearly. And once I started seeing, I didn't look away. That night at the event wasn't the first time I knew. It was just the first time I acted on it. The real decision had already been made earlier, in a quieter place, without witnesses or noise. It happened in small increments, the way structural damage shows up before anything actually collapses. No single moment you can point to, just a series of realizations that stop leaving room for doubt. After Claire left me that remote, I didn't rush to use it. That's what I would have done before. Look for immediate answers, force clarity, confront whatever was in front of me. Instead, I waited. Not because I was afraid. Because I already understood what waiting would show me. That week, I moved through our house like I was seeing it for the first time. Not emotionally. Practically. I noticed where things were placed, how often they moved, what stayed untouched. Her routines stopped feeling familiar and started feeling rehearsed. The way she set her keys down, always screen up. The way she angled her phone away without thinking about it. The way conversations ended just slightly too early, like she had somewhere else to be even when she was standing right in front of me. I didn't ask questions. Questions invite explanations. And I had enough of those already. Instead, I paid attention. One night, she came home just after 10. Same quiet entry, same careful movements. She poured herself a glass of water, stood at the counter, and checked her phone with that small, contained smile she never used with me anymore. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. But it didn't belong to anything we shared. I sat at the table, watching without reacting. That was new. Before, I would have said something, asked how her day was, tried to pull her back into the version of us I was still holding on to. That night, I didn't interrupt. I didn't shift the moment. I just let it exist as it was. She noticed eventually. "Everything okay?" she asked, casual, almost automatic. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." She nodded, relieved by the simplicity of the answer, and went back to her phone. That was when it settled. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just a quiet understanding that whatever I had been trying to preserve was already gone. Not recently. Not suddenly. It had been gone long enough for new habits to replace it. I went to bed before her that night. Not to avoid her. Because there was nothing left to engage with. Lying there in the dark, I didn't run through conversations or outcomes. I didn't plan what I would say or how I would confront her. That part of me had already shut down. In its place was something steadier. More controlled. I wasn't going to fix this. I wasn't going to compete with something I hadn't agreed to. And I wasn't going to ask for honesty from someone who had already decided not to give it. By the time I finally picked up the remote a few nights later, the outcome didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt inevitable. What changed in me wasn't the discovery. It was the decision to stop pretending I needed one. After that, I stopped thinking in terms of trust. Not because I had proof yet, but because trust requires participation from both sides. What I had instead was distance, patterns, and time. And time, if you let it run without interruption, has a way of organizing things for you. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I just watched. It started with small details. The kind you ignore when you're still invested in keeping things intact. The way she checked her phone before she even took off her shoes. The slight shift in her tone when she said certain names, especially one. Daniel came up more often than anyone else at the firm. Not in long stories. Just mentions. Casual, frequent, almost automatic. Daniel needed revisions. Daniel stayed late. Daniel's pushing timelines again. It wasn't what she said. It was how often she needed to say it. I began keeping track without writing anything down. Dates, times, gaps. Which nights she was late. Which mornings she left early. Which explanations repeated themselves too cleanly, like they had been used before. Patterns formed quickly once I stopped interrupting them. Her schedule started to look structured in a way it hadn't before. Tuesdays and Thursdays ran late more often than the rest. Fridays were inconsistent, but when she stayed out longer. Weekends became selective. Either completely present or entirely unavailable, with no middle ground. I didn't ask which it would be. I just noted which one it was. Money told its own version of the story. Not anything obvious. No large withdrawals or careless spending. But small things shifted. Charges that didn't match her usual routines. Places she had never mentioned. Receipts that appeared without context and disappeared just as quickly. Nothing that would stand on its own. Everything that made sense when you stopped isolating it. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. People reveal more through repetition than through access. One night, she mentioned a late meeting again. Same tone, same phrasing. I nodded, same as always. After she left, I stayed at the table a little longer than usual, then got up and checked the clock. Not because I doubted her, because I wanted to see how consistent the timing was. She came back 3 hours later. Not 2, not 4, 3. That became important later. I started noticing how she moved when she thought no one was paying attention. The way she paused before responding to messages. The way her expression changed slightly before she typed. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Just focus. Directed attention that didn't belong to anything in our house. I didn't interrupt those moments. I let them happen. The more I observed, the less I needed confirmation. The story built itself in pieces, each one aligning with the last. No dramatic reveal. No single piece of evidence that changed everything. Just accumulation. That was enough. By the time I finally reviewed what was on that remote, I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was verifying what I already understood. I didn't expect it to spread. That wasn't part of the plan. When I pressed that button, I wasn't thinking about anyone outside that room. I wasn't trying to make a statement or prove a point to a wider audience. I just wanted the truth to exist in the same space as the story she had been maintaining. But truth doesn't stay contained once it's visible. Someone recorded it. I didn't see who. I didn't need to. By the time I left the venue that night, People were already on their phones, already sending messages, already turning a private collapse into something shareable. A few short clips, a few still frames. Enough to build a version of events that could travel faster than context ever could. By morning, it was everywhere. Not everywhere in the world, just everywhere that mattered to us. Group chats, office threads, quiet conversations that weren't as quiet as people thought. Someone added captions. Someone else added speculation. Names started appearing in places they weren't supposed to. Mine included. I didn't respond. There were messages waiting for me when I woke up. Friends asking what happened. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly interested in my life again. A few neutral, some supportive, others just curious, looking for details they could pass along. I left them unanswered. Work shifted first. Not directly. No one called me to ask questions. No one accused me of anything. But tone changes in small ways before anything official happens. A supplier I'd worked with for years kept the conversation shorter than usual. A client postponed a meeting without explanation. Another asked, carefully, if everything was stable on my end. That word stayed with me. Stable. Like what had happened was something that could affect more than just a marriage. Laura's world reacted faster. Law firms don't tolerate unpredictability, especially not the kind that becomes public. By midday, I heard through someone else that she had been asked not to come in. Not suspended. Not officially. Just take a few days. Give things time to settle. Assess the situation. That was how they handled it. Distance first. Decisions later. Daniel's name started appearing more often too. Not in statements. In questions. People were connecting timelines. Matching faces to roles. Trying to understand how something that had stayed quiet long enough to develop had suddenly become visible in a single night. Some defended her. Some defended him. Most stayed neutral, waiting to see which version would hold. I stayed out of all of it. I didn't correct anything. I didn't add details. What happened spoke for itself. That was the part most people didn't understand. They thought exposure was the end of something. It wasn't. It was the point where everything that had been managed privately lost its structure. Once it left that space, it stopped belonging to the people involved. It became interpretation, opinion, narrative shaped by whoever was looking at it. I didn't try to control that. Control had already been misused long before I got involved. By the second day, the volume started to drop. Not because people lost interest, because they had already formed their conclusions. That's how it works. Fast at the beginning, then quiet. And in that quiet, what's left isn't the noise. It's what actually remains when no one's watching anymore. She came back the next day, just after noon. Not rushed. Not disorganized. If anything, more composed than I had seen her in months. Hair pulled back clean, minimal makeup, neutral clothes. The version of her that belonged in controlled environments, not the one from the night before. She let herself in like nothing had changed. Set her bag down in the same place. Took off her coat. Paused for half a second when she saw me at the table, then continued moving like she had already rehearsed the moment. I think we should talk, she said. Her voice was steady, measured. I nodded once. Go ahead. She didn't sit immediately. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself water, took a sip, then turned back toward me. Small delays. Controlled pacing. Giving herself time to settle into whatever version of this she had prepared. What happened last night? She started, then stopped. Adjusted. That wasn't necessary. I didn't respond. She took that as permission to continue. There are things you don't fully understand, she said. Professional dynamics. Reputational risk. The way situations can be misinterpreted when they're taken out of context. I watched her while she spoke. Not her words. Her structure. Everything she said was built to minimize, to reframe, to introduce complexity where the reality had already been simple enough to recognize. No direct denial. No clear admission. Just language designed to move the focus away from what was already visible. It was a mistake, she added after a pause. A lapse in judgment. Not something ongoing. Not something that defines everything else. That part was intentional. Define everything else. She wanted boundaries around it. Containment. Something she could eventually step outside of. I leaned back slightly in my chair. How long? I asked. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. That's not the right question, she said. It is for me. Silence stretched between us. Not heavy, just empty. A few months, she said finally. It didn't start the way you think. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I had already heard enough. She took that as an opening. I'm handling it, she continued. The firm is aware. There are internal processes. This doesn't need to become something bigger than it already is. There it was. Control again. Containment. Not of the situation. Of the narrative. I stood up slowly, more out of habit than intention, and walked past her to the counter. Not to create distance. Just to move. I'm not trying to make it anything, I said. She turned toward me, something sharper in her expression now. Then why did you do that? She asked. Why handle it like that? I looked at her for a moment. Not angry. Not calm. Just clear. It was already happening, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. That was the first time she didn't have an immediate response. Her posture shifted slightly. Not collapse. Not panic. Just a loss of structure. We can fix this, she said after a moment. But not if you keep approaching it like this. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to fix. And for the first time since she walked in, I realized something had changed completely. I wasn't waiting for her to understand anymore. I was just listening until she finished. After that conversation, things started moving without me. Not immediately. Not in a way you could point to and say something had shifted. But once everything was out in the open, it didn't need help anymore. It carried its own momentum. I didn't follow her. I didn't ask what she was doing or who she was talking to. I went back to my routines. Work in the mornings. Site visits. Calls. Numbers. The same structure I had before, but without the background noise of trying to hold something together that wasn't holding. That part was gone, and what replaced it wasn't relief. It was space. Laura stayed busy. More than before. Phone calls in other rooms. Messages she answered quickly, then deleted just as quickly. Conversations that ended the moment I entered the space, not out of guilt, but out of habit. The same patterns were still there, just stripped of any attempt to disguise them. What changed was everything around them. The firm didn't bring her back in right away. Temporary leave turned into something less defined. Meetings happened without her. Decisions were made that didn't include her input. The language shifted from internal to external. Not directly, but enough to understand where it was going. Daniel disappeared from her conversations. Not completely, just carefully. His name stopped coming up, which told me more than when it had been constant. People don't remove something unless it's become a liability. Silence, in that case, wasn't absence. It was distance. I heard pieces of it through other people. Not gossip. Information. He had stepped back from certain responsibilities. Not publicly. Just enough to reduce visibility. There were discussions happening above him. Reviews. Quiet evaluations of risk. None of it involved me. And I didn't involve myself. At home, the house felt different. Not tense. Not hostile. Just disconnected. We moved around each other without conflict, like two people sharing space for practical reasons. Conversations became functional. Schedules. Logistics. Nothing that required engagement beyond what was necessary. One evening, she left her laptop open on the table. Not intentionally, just carelessness. An email thread sat there, partially visible. Internal addresses. Formal language. Words like conduct, review, external exposure. I didn't read it fully. I didn't need to. The structure of it was enough. Processes had started. And once they start in that environment, they don't reverse. Over the next few days, more things surfaced. Not new events. Existing ones, becoming visible. Dates that aligned too cleanly. Overlaps between her schedule and his. Small confirmations from places that didn't realize they were confirming anything. Everything I had observed quietly now had context. Not because I went looking for it, but because it began to show itself. That's how it happens. Not all at once. Gradually. Until the version that was hidden no longer has anywhere to stay. I didn't interfere. There was nothing to gain from stepping in. The outcome wasn't dependent on me anymore. Whatever she had built over those months was already unstable. All I did was stop holding it up. At some point, it just ended. Not in a single moment. Not with a final conversation or some clear line where everything before belonged to one version of our life and everything after belonged to another. It was quieter than that. More gradual. Like something that had already been breaking finally reached the point where it didn't need to hold together anymore. She stopped coming home for a few days. No announcement. No explanation. Just absence. At first, I noticed it the way you notice any change in routine. Then it settled into something more permanent. Her side of the closet stayed untouched. Her shoes remained where she had left them, but nothing new replaced them. The house didn't feel emptier. It felt accurate. There were messages. Short. Practical. I'll be staying somewhere else for now. We should coordinate on the house. Legal will reach out. No emotion attached to any of it. I responded the same way. Understood. Let me know when. Okay. There wasn't anything else to say. By then, whatever connection we had once relied on for meaning had already been stripped down to logistics. Removing the rest of it didn't feel like loss. It felt like completion. A week later, I met with a lawyer. Not because I needed to fight anything. Because structure matters when things end. We went through the details calmly. Assets, ownership, timelines. Nothing complicated. No hidden disputes. Everything laid out the way it had always been, just without the assumption that it would continue. She didn't contest anything. From what I understood, she didn't have the position to. The firm had made its decisions. Not publicly. Not in a way that created headlines or formal statements. But internally, the outcome was clear enough. Roles shifted. Responsibilities reassigned. Distance created where proximity had once been useful. Daniel was no longer part of her environment. That part closed without noise. Whatever had connected them didn't survive exposure to the same reality that ended everything else. There was no visible conflict. No defense. Just separation. That was the part people don't talk about. How quickly something that felt important can dissolve once it's no longer hidden. The house went quiet. Not heavy. Not tense. Just still. I kept my routines. Work continued. Mornings stayed the same. Evenings became simpler. Fewer interruptions. Fewer adjustments. The space I had been sharing with something unstable now belonged entirely to me, and I didn't rush to fill it. There was no final scene. No moment where we stood across from each other and said everything that needed to be said. That kind of closure assumes there's still something left to resolve. There wasn't. What needed to end had already ended. All that remained was accepting it without trying to reshape it into something cleaner than it actually was. And once I did that, the silence stopped feeling like something I had to carry. It just became part of the structure again. Life didn't reset after that. It just continued, without the parts that no longer fit. The house stayed the same on the outside. Same siding, same porch, same fence I had rebuilt a few summers back. But inside, it felt different in a way that wasn't obvious to anyone else. The air was quieter. Not empty. Just undisturbed. I stopped expecting sounds that weren't coming back. Her routines disappeared first. Then the small adjustments I used to make around them. Dinner happened when I was hungry, not when it worked for both of us. Evenings stretched longer, but they didn't feel heavy anymore. Just open. Work picked up naturally. Not because I forced it. Because I had the time and focus to let it. I didn't think about her much. Not in the way people assume. There was no replaying conversations, no trying to understand where it went wrong. That kind of thinking belongs to a version of things that still feels active. This didn't. It was finished. Completely. That night. The one with the screen, the silence, and her expression before anything even played. That was the point where I left something behind. Not just her. The version of myself that kept adjusting to make something unstable feel steady. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to go back and check if I had made the right decision. I already knew I had. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.